Man, it's wild. No, back before I moved to Montana, I worked in the emergency room in Pensacola, Florida, and you would see so many people that if they get caught with the drugs or something, they would swallow their dime bags or something just to try and get away from it. And it was just like that doesn't do
That's not
you
a good
any
life
good.
choice.
No, that does you no good at all. And the funniest or most infamous story, if you want to call it that, this dude, he did that. He swallowed a dime bag, and then of course immediately what you do is that you pretend like that you faint or go into a coma or something, because then you have to go to the hospital first. Long story short, they put a catheter in this dude.
Oh God!
And because a lot of times that's enough to wake a guy up. You'll start showing some life. This guy took it like this dude took it like a trumper. Did not move, didn't flinch. I could not have done that. Just saying. Well, long story short, catheters are held in because there's a balloon at the end that expands at your bladder. Well, this dude obviously didn't know.
I hope
that.
this is something I never have to experience personally.
So he was laying down in the trauma room. Like 3 hours later, he gets up and runs with his catheter still in him, with predictable results when that balloon ripped out. It was a hellacious mess. That was, yes. Every man watching this stream right now can imagine what happened. He will never have
my balls are crawling back up inside.
Yes.
Oh my God.
So Achilles, this is the kind of high-end content that you're coming to today.
Welcome. This is what I have to follow.
All right, let's
100%. 100%.
Keep it classy. Keep it classy.
Let's bring in Aquiles. Aquiles Larrea Jr. is the founder and CEO
How am I
of Larrea
supposed
Wealth
to follow
Management
this?
in New York City.
I have no idea.
Oh, we have no doubt you can do that.
You're a man of many talents.
I'll tell our personal grocery stories. So he's a personal CFO to Latino executives and entrepreneurs with over $1 million portfolios, a St. John's University graduate. And I don't know if this is true. I found this on AI. 3rd degree black belt. Is that true?
I'm 5th now. I was supposed to be going, but
remind me never to cause you offense.
I've been remiss in my practicing, so I can't even say I'm a karate guy as much anymore. I practice outside in the mornings and do roughly 20 minutes of work, but aside from that, it's I can't even get to the dojo nowadays. It's because I'm so busy with business and what have you.
Well, it's a good problem to have, but still, that's extremely impressive. I mean, I can't even imagine. So congratulations on that. Maybe you'll get back to it.
Thank you.
If the economy tanks next year, you'll have maybe more time on your hands.
I'm busier when it's worse.
Oh, I bet. You get a lot of nervous calls from clients, right?
Not a lot, but new clients and prospective clients definitely reach out to you because they've been on the fence for a while or what have you, and they want to talk to an expert or they want to talk to someone who's out there, who's in the trenches.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about Donald Trump's. This was Robby's idea to do this topic, and I really like it. The idea is that Donald Trump has promised to reindustrialize the Rust Belt, where I'm from. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. It was well into a 6-figure population when I grew up there. Headquarters of regional banks, factories. NCR was headquartered there. Defense Electronics Supply Corporation, Delco Moraine. Every S5 and S10 pickup truck in the world was made in Dayton or in Moraine, Ohio, just outside Dayton. And today, Dayton is a shell of what it used to be. And then that's a very typical problem. And, I would say it's a large part of the reason that Donald Trump is president of the United States, is he was able to go to places like Dayton, where he went often, and look out the window of his car and think, man, this must suck to live here. And people felt seen, and they voted for him. And so he's talking about he talked about bringing coal back. There's really apparently not much appetite for that for a variety of reasons, but he is now talking about reindustrializing the Rust Belt, and also this move with tariffs and tax cuts and deregulation, not to mention the attempt to revive the steel industry, appears to be tied in with this goal that he stated that he wants to revive, of all things, the shipbuilding industry in the United States, which has been long gone and we thought we'd never see again. So, we wanted to ask you, sort of about the pros and cons of this. I mean, Donald Trump, he says a lot of things that he doesn't seem to care much about. And then other things he cares deeply about. And, it's like, so, I can immediately see, the pros and cons. When I was a kid, and I would go, and I was growing up in Dayton, I developed asthma because the air was so bad from those factories. I remember the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland catching fire, which basically inaugurated the modern environmental movement. And when in the 1980s, so many companies went out of business in Ohio and Michigan that they stopped dumping toxins into Lake Erie. Lake Erie, which had been declared biologically dead by the EPA, there weren't even microbes, came back. Now you can catch big fish there. Nature has revived. So I can see, I could see the I want the jobs back. I want the banks back. I want my former neighbors to be able to afford to send their kids to college again. But I also don't know if I want an AQI of 290 every day like I used to have, and and everybody growing up with asthma, and and all the fish in Lake Erie dying again. So I don't know. I just wanted to get into it with you and see what do you think about this?
I think it's very interesting. He says a lot of things, but the truth of the matter is the devil's in the details. You're going to bring back coal, not a great idea. Will pollute even more the environment. And honestly, the thinking in my head is, what are we back in 50, 60 years ago? I don't understand
Mm,
this mentality. I think that there are plenty of other industries that could be brought to bear in an area like Dayton and the surrounding areas where you could make just as much, if not more, money. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, to have, say, whether it be call centers, whether it be AI data storage,
hmm
things that just make sense in the here and now. We have not had steel in this country. I mean, what was the last? Pittsburgh still has one uh, thing left, one of those factories left.
U.S.
We haven't
Steel. That's the
had
last
that.
one.
Yeah, we haven't had that for the longest time, and simply because it is much cheaper to produce in other countries. You can't force an industry to bring it back here unless, what are we going to do? Are we going to pay these people slave labor wages? Because that's what you would have to do to really make it work here. All right. There would have to be some sort of industrialized zone of sorts to get away with this. But if you think about it, we're also inviting back not only environmental disasters. I mean, you talk about Lake Erie. I mean, you could talk about several areas that were declared. The whole reason why we have super funds was
hmm
because this kept happening again and again throughout the country because there was no corporate responsibility. All right. The corporations were getting away with it. They're still getting away with it, just as not on a larger scale as they did back in the 50s and 60s, where it was known that a lot of these things could contaminate the water. It could contaminate, your foodstuffs, food supplies. And you mentioned, your asthma. I'm guessing there were plenty of other diseases as a direct result of these corporations being there. Do you really think that that won't happen again, and maybe 3 or 4 times worse because of the amount of toxins? And before we had a certain amount, let's use the pot example for argument's sake. Let's say back in the 60s and 70s, pot had a certain amount of THC in it,
mm.
right, which is the active ingredient. That's the stuff that gets you high. But can you imagine, the pot now has 3 to 7 times the amount. And now I'm just spitballing here, but you were talking about these companies, which haven't been the most responsible of companies, to come back in to let that damage happen, it would accelerate, I would say, fivefold, tenfold. And it, instead of ruining the environment in, say, 3 years, we're talking maybe one, where you're starting to see the all these adverse effects on people. And then, what are you going to do from there? Oh, I'm sorry, we knew about it, but, which was the case. Most of these companies knew, it's kind of like cigarettes. They know it was toxic. They knew it caused cancer. They knew that there were plenty of adverse effects from smoking, yet they still function. And once they got you hooked, you were in there, and to the day, that is still the case. And then I don't have anything against that. If that's your thing, I'm not going to tell you, don't smoke. All right. But so long as you know the risk that you run by doing so, then that's on you. So I see these companies, I see, shipbuilding, that's super interesting to me. I was like, okay, so we're going to build a shipyard here, in Dayton, for argument's sake, and
Well,
we're
it
going to
won't
bring
be in
that,
Dayton. It'll be in Baltimore, let's say,
right.
right?
Okay, let's say
Or
Baltimore
Norfolk.
for, all right. Where traditionally those industries were housed, if I remember correctly. And you're going to build your ships there, but how much are you going to pay these people? If we go do it somewhere else in the world, we can get it for a third of the price.
Well, I
That
think the
is
argument
still the
would be,
case.
and
Basically,
I can really argue this both ways as I set it up, right? But I mean, I think the argument in favor would be to say, maybe we don't have to pay slave wages to make this work. I mean, you're talking about stuff that is intrinsically very, very heavy to and expensive to transport. Steel, all the stuff that goes into shipbuilding. So if you made steel here, and you hire American workers to make the steel, you hire American workers to truck the steel or railroad it, through intermodal transport to shipbuilding facilities. I mean, it seems to me like it could be, it could be, you wouldn't necessarily have to pay, low wages, because there's economies to be made because it's already here, right? I mean, so I don't know. I can see
It
how it could
hasn't been
work.
here for a very long time, and I don't see how economically this is going to be a viable thing.
Mhm.
You're talking about major components for a huge endeavor. Yeah, I get
Yeah.
that we could conceivably do it here. I don't think it would be to the company, whoever's manufacturing it, it's not going to be to their benefit, because really, how much are they going to get back as far as their investment is concerned?
It
You
does feel
know,
very 20th century, right? It's like,
it,
instead of like going with the way things are and adapting to that, it's like,
yeah.
let's go back to the way things were.
Ted, look at China right now, right? China is no longer the big boy when it comes to the clothing, the industrial industries. That's happening now. That's going to Mexico right now. It's cheaper to produce those goods there. So, and then on top of that, China has a huge problem that there's not going to be enough of a population to fund the retirements of the elderly in that country. you know, Everybody went through World War II. And if we look at just the population segments of the elderly, you would need 2 to 3 more times population in order to fund that pension scheme
Mhm.
going forward, and they just don't have it. Real estate, another area in China that just can't be supported by the numbers out there right now. We see a little of that here, but I'm not sure. To me, this is just sounding a little bit more like a gimmick, another Trump gimmick. This doesn't. I don't care what you think of the guy. I think you got to have ideas, of course, but I think these are not the ones that will carry us in to the next century, which is what I
here's
believe that he should be doing.
here's the view from Middle America where I am. I'm in the part of the country that everyone always forgets. The tone on the street here, and I guarantee you this is going to be the same whether you're in Montana or in Ohio or Kentucky or Illinois. Pick your flyover state. The tone on the street here is that inflation goes up 2 to 4% every year. Our wages are shrinking because the wages aren't keeping up. So then it becomes a struggle. You can forget about buying a car. You can forget about ever buying a house. It's never going to happen. I will never own a home. That's just it is impossible unless something just drastically changes. It's never going to happen for me. And there's millions of people who are like that. And so they see, all the talk going on about this 21st century economy. But the problem is that the American middle class is being destroyed in the process by it. At least that's how it feels. Like, right now, my wife and I, we're going over looking at our budgets. We're like, okay, so with the price of food, rent goes up every year. I simply do not care about what the economy is going to look like 10 years from now. I care about right now, where that's Trump's power. Is like, I hear you, I see you. Wall Street has forgotten you. The political class, Republican and Democrat alike, not only do they not listen to you, they actively hate you. That's the feeling on the street. And so whenever Trump comes out and says, I'm going to rack up these tariffs to make it so much more expensive for companies to outsource those jobs, or like to your point, to foreign workers because it's cheaper. That way I can bring these industries back and start bringing high-paying jobs where you could actually, I don't know, buy a car or be able to invest in the stock market or be able to actually start building a life. And so, like to Ted's point about the environment, I'm in Montana. It's beautiful here. You can't eat the scenery. And so that's what people are looking at. Is like on the Crow Indian Reservation. When the coal mine there got shut down, the unemployment rate there is about 80% now. It's insane. And so people in the middle of the country, like, we hear what the analysts are saying. We don't care because we cannot afford to live. And if Trump is able to deliver on some of this stuff, I promise both of you is that Trump will win the midterms, and his MAGA faction, love it or hate it, will become a force that cannot be stopped because Trump will capture that working class anger and build on it. Where am I going wrong on this?
I don't think you're going wrong on any of this. You see it firsthand. I see it here in New York City. I mean, the have and have nots, there's a big disparity that will continue to grow. And you know who the biggest culprit in this? Corporations, because
Yeah.
wage stagflation is at all-time highs. We've seen that they are not keeping up. They're showing it's a mixed message because you're seeing they're showing record profits. They're paying their CEOs X amount of money, and this in turn is showing middle America that, like you said, the companies, we don't care about you. Wall Street doesn't care about you. This has to, the answer is not easy. The answer is actually begins on the grassroots level, in my opinion, from the local congressperson there. I'll give you an example. In New York City, you have congressmen here who are still going out to the food banks here, who are still in touch with the people, like her or not, AOC, right? Uh, she is in Elmhurst, Queens. She is in Queens in general and the Bronx all the time. She does not sit from a perch in Washington, D.C. Anytime the Republicans have tried to knock her out of the race, she has destroyed them by usually 80 to 90% versus their candidate. All right. Why? Because she understands, and she talked about it a little bit. I saw on social media the other day, she was talking about this thing where if your prices keep going up, and that with the tariffs, to me, make this move on the tariff unconscionable. It doesn't make sense to me. All right. We are not, this country was built on tariffs. If you think about it, back in the 1800s, the 1700s, there was no IRS at the time. But at the same time, we are not in the same world. You would be dragging us back 100 years to a place where kids were still working. All right. 9 to 5 or 12 hours in the factory, severed hands, fires occurring in factories with no payments going out to families. Do you really want to go back to that? I think people love the idea, hey, put me to work, put my kids to work, or whatever, whatever it
Sure.
needs to do. But if a company came out, to middle America, there's going to be a lot more concessions. What they should be doing there is creating special tax zones for these companies and a living wage that everybody can be proud to have.
Yeah.
But how do you do that? Like I said, you create a special tax zone, you create a special industrial zone that benefits the companies, but in turn, you got to have an agreement and say, hey, we're giving you all these breaks, we're giving you all these things, but you have to hire local people, for X percentage of your workforce. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't want to see people coming in from New York.
And
I don't
X
want to see
number
people.
of them.
Correct.
And you have to stay open for X amount of time.
If I
Correct. You
lived
just
in,
can't up and leave.
These
if
Reagan, I think it was, who started these enterprise zones, and they didn't work because they didn't there was no they didn't really hold the company's feet to the fire.
Right. There was no accountability with those companies. Absolutely. I thought it was a good idea in theory, but without holding these companies accountable, you say to the company, hey, we're going to, we expect you to hire X amount of people in this amount of time. And if you don't do it, guess what? One segment of your tax, or we're going to increase your taxes by the percentage that we agreed upon. Once again, the devil's in the details. I think this might be more effective than just say we're going to bring all these industries back. And if you look at like the car industry going back and forth, they go back and forth from both Mexico and Canada,
Mhm.
for the parts and the like that are made in this free trade zone we used to
Mhm.
have.
Mhm.
Now no longer, because we're looking for someone to blame so we can get more tax cuts for the rich. Let's call it what it is. All right. So in my opinion, the only way to fix that is everybody sit down. At the end of the day, this is about money.
Sure.
Sit down, let's
Always.
talk about it. Let's create a special agreement between Mexico, the United States, and Canada that everybody benefits. So that way, middle Canada benefits. Blue collar workers benefit more than anything. You know what? Blue collar built this country and built many countries. You having good people who work and earn a decent wage, a living wage, is the way out of this, in my opinion.
I agree, and I I think this is about money, but I think more than that, Achilles. I think in this case, it's more about stability because there's so many people who are giving up on voting. They're giving up on the system. They're completely unplugged, and all they feel is despair, and then that despair then becomes anger. And if someone's listening, Angie Wong, I know you're watching right now. If you want to unseat AOC in New York City, I can tell you how, and I can answer your question also about tariffs. AOC going to the food or going to the Bronx and stuff, doing her little photo ops is great. But you want to know how you take her out? This is how you take her out, Angie. Listen to me. If you want to win that seat in New York, you go there and say, instead of you being here in this food line, how about if we bring these apparel companies there in Mexico because of the tariffs? Let's raise the tariffs. Let's make it more affordable for these companies to be here and start building apparel factories here in the Bronx again. Let's bring jobs here. That way you don't have to be in
What
this
you're
line
talking
anymore.
about has already been happening. The last Bronx borough manager, and you have to live here to really know the situation, what's going on
Okay.
here. So no offense to you,
Sure.
but
No, I don't
we're
know.
not talking about AOC just doing that. We're talking about there is a concerted effort in the Bronx by the borough manager, by the
President
head of the borough there. But
Ferrer, right?
I
Or
think so. I
is that
don't know
still
at
him?
this point. I
Yeah,
don't
because
really
you two
Yeah.
know.
are neighbors, ain't you? Y'all both live in New York City.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
yeah, New York City is 5 boroughs. Everybody forgets there's
Yeah.
5 boroughs here, 5 counties,
Mhm.
and we all work together. I mean, we try to work together for the same goals, which is to
Sure.
have that living wage, to have that quality of life. You know what? What really has taken off here? Technology. There are spaces for technology, where the big corporations, I mean, at one point we had the talk Google coming in at one point, and that fizzled out because they didn't want to play by the rules. They did not want to be accountable to New York City. And, basically we said, no, absolutely not.
Yeah,
We need,
AOC told Amazon to go to hell too in
yeah,
Queens. And
yeah.
and people this might break people's brains outside of New York City, but that was a popular decision on her part. New Yorkers were like, yeah, bye Amazon, see ya, because these were subpar wages.
Was it 'cause they shouldn't
not
pay or
only were
what?
they subpar, but you have to remember New York is one of the most, in comparison, I think only Los Angeles compares, but New York is one of the, if not the most expensive places to
Mhm.
live. So you cannot get away with coming here and deciding, hey, we're going to pay a subpar wage
Yeah,
and get
well, here's
away
your
with it. That's
$12
not
an
going to
hour.
happen. The unions say no,
Not to
and the
mention
unions
Amazon
are
was going to
very,
get all sorts of city. They were going to get all sorts of city tax breaks. It's like,
absolutely.
why?
Right,
It's like,
exactly. They have plenty of money. Give them some breaks, of course,
Yeah.
encourage the business, but to make it where economically for a family whose parents are working in these shops, not the right
well, what
decision.
works for New York is what not doesn't necessarily work in Montana, right? I mean,
Correct.
New York has a highly educated workforce. It's high population density, very expensive real estate, so it doesn't
Huge
make a lot of
tax
sense.
base.
Right. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to have, big factories, employing people who don't need a college degree to do those jobs or to get hired to do those jobs. It's true that for us, AI and programming and all that, coding, and getting people who, are all living close to one another and doing knowledge-based stuff makes more sense because we all live next, New York City's a big city, but it's vertical and nothing's really that far from each other. You could be, the furthest part of the Bronx to the furthest part of Manhattan by subway is maybe an hour and 15 minutes. It's not that bad, and it could be faster sometimes. So it's like we're interconnected in a way that other places aren't. So I think that's an important thing. Speaking of AI, I asked AI about this topic about achievability of Trump's goals. I thought you'd find this amusing. AI says modernizing infrastructure and securing funding would face political gridlock and budget constraints. The odds are 50 to 60% with bipartisan support, right? So no bipartisan support, obviously, right? I don't think. Training a workforce is feasible, 70% chance, if education aligns with demand, which these days is totally not the case, right? There's tons of people who need jobs, tons of employers who say they can't find people to fill the positions that they need because they don't have the right educations. And supply chain retooling is tougher, 40 to 50%, given global competition and cost. Government commitment via defense spending, which Trump is going to cut, and or protectionist policies could push success to 60 to 70%, but sustained effort over decades is key. And that's when I started laughing. America doesn't do sustained effort over months, much less decades.
Let me ask Robby a question. Robby,
Sure.
let's just say for argument's sake, I'm a big company. I come into Montana where you
Okay.
are, and I say, okay, for the most part, we're going to give you paid training,
Right.
but it's going to be a third of what you would normally make, right? But you really need to know how to operate uh, the next phase of this evolution that's going to occur here, you
Sure.
know. But by the end of it, your wage is going to be, let's just say the median wage there is 40,000, right?
Yep.
They say by the time we're done, you should be at 35 to 38, 35 to 40 as far as the band is concerned, that wage band,
Okay.
or higher. All right.
Sure.
Would you welcome that? Would you sit
100%.
down, do the training, go through it. It might take 6 months to a year. I know that most people would,
Yeah,
but the question is, would we hold the company accountable for that training? Because training costs them money. They're
sure,
going to, any big business that moves into an area, they lose months.
sure.
I want to say 8 months or a year easily. They lose money for that entire period until everything is up and going. And I think that is really the way in Middle America to make people interested. I
Yeah.
don't think that this idea of going back and I mean I know that some people will just take any job, but at this
Right now, here
particular
it's all about
point,
just surviving. It's
yeah,
all about just surviving right now. I mean, forget
right,
about the job that you want to have. It's literally, I mean, here, Achilles, and I'm sure, I mean, I speak for probably 90% of Middle America right now.
it's here too. Yeah,
It's all about
Yeah.
just simply surviving. It's about just being able to pay the rent and then decide what bill am I going to be late on this month so I can get groceries for my kids. I mean, that
and
is the reality.
absolutely. And when you are thinking that way, pardon me for saying this, your mind cannot think of bigger things.
Of course.
And that is the perfect way that companies, corporations keep a certain percentage
Yeah.
of the population down, right?
Yep.
It is exactly their program, whether conscious or not. This is the way they keep people below middle class, and that they can control people
Yep.
more so who are at that level, because you cannot think big if you can't make your rent, you can't buy your kids things. Absolutely not. So we have to find something that gets them on the road to, okay, like I mentioned, the training's going to start here.
Sure.
We're going to pay, 80% of what your wage is going to be. Then it goes up. The longer you're in there, the higher it goes up. So
Yeah.
let's say 6 months from now, you get a pay increase.
Yeah.
6 months after, you get, and then all of a sudden you're at 100%. So the next thing you know, instead of 40,000, you're closer to 50,000.
Do you want me to tell you why that would never happen?
Please.
H-1B visas. It is cheaper for companies, and this is one of the reasons why people on the right, like me, absolutely hate them. And I'm sure there's a lot of bleed over on the left too, because there is no incentive for companies like what you're talking about to come in and start training people, investing in that human capital, build that workforce domestically. If you can hire a foreigner that already is trained for 60%, and they're already able to bring that full load in. So
Right.
that's the daylight between me and Trump. Like I'm a MAGA conservative. I'm not a Republican. I hate the Republican Party. I despise them because I mean they made it very clear they're not for me. But the split that you see on the right is between what you just talk about investing in the American population versus the country club Republicans who want to bring in foreign serfs, let's call them what it is, H-1B visa holders, to depress those wages. And that's what I'm saying. What Trump is doing now, he's pushing for stability. I think that if he's able to win the working class and say, listen, I'm fighting for you, and these asshole Republicans and Democrats are the ones who are actively screwing you, they're voting against what I'm trying to do, he will win the midterms. And to borrow a Trumpism, he will win bigly because this is about building a
I don't
movement for
disagree.
him.
I don't disagree. I think when you appeal to the segment, a large segment of the population that's suffering, that's going through this, and that the corporations are not on board with, like you said, having these visas
Well, they're incentivized not
reduced,
to.
redacted, and the like. But here's the thing: at some point, we have to get on board with getting some people
I
aboard
agree.
domestically. And the
Things are going to
question now
explode.
goes back to the corporations: are they willing to go and do this?
Yeah, either
And
that or they're going to deal with political instability that's going to hurt their bottom line in a major way. We're going to have to leave that there, Aquiles, but thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to see you. Aquiles Larrea Jr. is the founder and CEO of Larrea Wealth Management here in New York City. Since 2002, he's been a personal CFO to Latino executives and entrepreneurs with $1 million plus portfolios, a graduate of St. John's University and a 5th degree black belt. He's a frequent media contributor on wealth strategies.
Let me throw something out real quick. Too,
Quickly.
Ted, real quick.
Okay.
I'm reading Achilles' book, Wise Up with Your Money. So I'm reading 2 books right now. I'm reading Ted's book, it's not out yet, and I'm reading his. And if you are interested at all in finance and trying to figure out just how to make your dollar stretch a little bit, I'm telling y'all, buy his book. It's on Amazon. Great read. I am not paid by him to push his book. I'm just telling you, it's a damn good book. Go buy it.
I appreciate that.
All right. And with that, talk to you soon, and have a great day, Achilles.